And my very last tip, be extremely careful if you use the reverbs that come with your synthesizer.
Move a little closer, I know you want to.
Hey guys, welcome to the studio. Today's episode is starting in the vocal booth. You can hear my voice very clearly. There is no reverb. Changing to the hallway, it's a whole nother story. And here in the studio, it's dry again, especially if you get really close to these absorbers. You can really hear how my voice is going in there, and there's nothing coming back. There's no reverb at all. It sounds very nice and dry. So since a lot of people asked about it, let's talk about reverbs. As you just heard, it's important. It can make a huge difference. It can really shape a sound. It can destroy it. It can make your mix open up. It can make your mix sound very washed out and muddy. It really depends on how you set the reverbs for your music production. First of all, it's really important which kind of elements need what kind of reverb and which elements need a reverb at all. And I'd say personally, the lower the frequency, the less reverb. I think below 100 Hertz, a reverb, at least like in music production, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I would never ever put reverb on a sub kick. On a top kick, maybe. That's a stylistic choice. And everything else, except for the sub bass, needs a reverb. Even if it's just a tiny reverb or just a reverb to give it a room, it needs something in there, on there, so that it actually sounds like natural, because our ear is used to listening to stuff with reverb on most of the time, and if there's none, it sounds a little like awkward. And the main purpose of reverb is to give things like a dimension, a room in the mix. The more reverb, the further back in the mix something sounds like. And this way you can also, same as with a stereo, left, right, middle, making things wide, you can give them a dimension back in the mix or to the front. So for example, if you make big room EDM and you have a lead synthesizer and you want it to be up in your face, make it as dry as possible. Don't make it entirely dry because that's awkward again, but make it really dry. Also for trap music, the snares are most of the time dry or just have like a tiny reverb tail to really hit hard in your face. So the softer, more in the background, the more reverb, the harder hitting, more upfront, the less reverb.
Think of the things that I'll do to you. Things that I'll do to you.
Let's Do To You, a song that is, it's complete. It's really complete. It's finished. Just adjusting like really fine details. And it's like a perfect example to show you some reverbs that I used on this song. So for example, I personally put all of my reverbs always on buses. And as you can see on the kick, there is no bus sent to anything. But if we, for example, let's maybe pick the snare. The snare has a bus sent to bus number 5, and bus number 5 has on it a Valhalla Vintage Verb, which is my personal favorite. This is not sponsored. I just love it. I use it for 95% of my reverbs. You can use any other reverb plugin. They're all really good, especially the ones that were released in the past 1 to 4 years. The older stuff sometimes sounds a little artificial, but even the stock reverb that comes with Logic is just amazing. It's even more powerful than the Valhalla one, but I know this one and it's fairly simple. You got your mix, which I don't need because I'm sending it via a bus, so the bus is my mix. You get the decay time, the pre-delay time. A decay time is, I think, pretty easy and obvious. That's for how long the reverb will be on the sound. How long is the tail of the reverb. And you can switch it up. Let's maybe, because this one is on the snare, let's just listen to the snare. Maybe first without reverb. And this already is like, without reverb, it's like just in your face. With the reverb, it sounds a little more natural. And then of course we can change the decay time to just make it longer. And that's like the point where it starts to muddy up the mix. If we now listen to the entire song again, it starts like the reverb tail is so long and so full and so present that it starts to interfere with other elements. So I think at 0.7 seconds it was actually pretty okay. The pre-delay is just like the starting point of the reverb basically. So you can delay the reverb tail. So you have first the dry original snare sound, and then a little bit after the reverb starts. So we can maybe exaggerate it so that you can actually hear it properly. Let's maybe turn it up. So it's first the snare and then the reverb starts at like 202. It's way exaggerated. I personally usually have it set to 0 to make it sound natural. Sometimes having it set to like 10 up to 20 also still sounds very natural, and it gives you more attack, like a sharper attack of the original sound. So if your attacks are a little muddy due to the reverb, you can change the pre-delay time, make the reverb shift it back a little, and it still then sounds natural and you got more attack. Then we got something else that is really important that every reverb has, that's like the shape of the room. So you're clapping, and now depending on where you are, it will sound different. And here, for example, you can just change like the size. So let's maybe switch it up all the way. And you see the decay time stays the same. But if we turn the size all the way down, it sounds like very much like a bathroom, like a small room where you have a lot of like flutter echoes and like the echoes bouncing fast between the walls. Personally, I prefer having like a medium to big size to make it sound nicer. The very short one sounds very artificial, so I'm trying to not use it that much. But it really depends. It could be a stylistic choice. It's important that you get these settings right. If you know about them and you know what they do, you can set your reverbs better and with more intent. Because I know a lot of producers know there needs to be reverb on, and they just slap any reverb on there and don't think about the reverb settings. Because yes, if you solo a sound and put reverb on it, it will usually sound richer and nicer. But in the mix, it's really important to control all of these parameters. The last one I would love to emphasize is the low cut. This one has a built-in one. You could also just like put an EQ afterwards and cut away. Here I'm cutting 560 Hertz. I don't need that. That's just mud. It's muddying up the mix. You can also cut the high frequencies to make it sound a little duller if you're making like very dark techno. That's maybe something you could do. And another thing, that's why I already have it like set up on the bus, is a sidechain. So the kick is feeded into the bus, and whenever the kick hits, the reverb gets sidechained as well. You can achieve the same by just putting the reverb behind the compressor on the same bus, but since I'm using an external bus just for the reverb, I have it on that channel so I can control it separately. And I think by far, and this is really by far it's so important, it's like the relationship between the decay time and the mix. So here I'm controlling the mix with the bus mix. Because you have to understand, you can have a long reverb tail and just mix it in a tiny bit. Or you can have a short decay time and mix it in a lot. This will not give you the same result. Having a long tail and mixing it in a little, the amount of reverb might be the same, but in one you have a longer tail that is just lower, and in one you have a shorter tail that is just like emphasized more and louder. So the relationship between those, it's a timing thing. So it depends on the tempo of the song, it depends on the style of the song, it depends on the kick. I personally usually listen to kick and snare, and then I'm listening for where it grooves the best. Is the decay too long? It will overlap the next kick, because you have like kick, kick and snare together and then kick again. And if the snare or clap reverb is so long that it hits the next kick, it's definitely too long. So you want to, like, it needs to have like a certain flow. It's hard to describe. Can you hear that, like the decay reverb, it stops at the point where it sounds like it's sucking again towards the next kick? That's what I love, like when it has this kind of groove. Let's maybe like switch up the decay to something that is too short. Now kick and snare sound very separate. It's like kick, snare, kick, snare. If we make it too long, it overlaps. So somewhere in between, and for this tempo, we're really slow on this track, it's 77. And then again, if you change the amount of reverb, this groove also changes again. So if I put more of it in there, the reverb is just too loud. It's hitting almost as hard as the snare itself, and that doesn't sound really good. So I like to turn it down again. We can like emphasize it again and make it like too dry. It's too much in your face. So I think like having this up a third, around a third, and this to 0.7 seconds gives me like the most natural groove. Don't overlap, don't make it too long, don't make it too short, and don't mix in too little or too much. This again highly depends on the material you're using. A snare, a clap that is in itself longer might sound different with the reverb, but like just listen for that groove, especially on snares and claps. For heads, for example, I'm also of course using a reverb, a different one that is shorter and room size is smaller. So just that there is something on there to give it reverb. And basically you want to go for a reverb that you hear once you mute it, that it's too dry and in your face. And once you unmute it, you hear that the head sounds natural in the mix and not too dry, but also that you don't really hear an obvious reverb. It's just like this minimum amount of reverb to make it sound natural for like everything, heads, percussions, and that kind of stuff, crashes, everything that is in the drum compartment basically. Percussions, sometimes if they're like one of the main elements, I give them a different reverb that is closer to the reverb of the snare or of like a main element. And then of course in this song, the thing some people love, some hate, is like the horn brass kind of section. Here, definitely more reverb, because like with main elements, you definitely need more reverb. Don't make it too short that it stops at the kick. It doesn't make any sense because the melody is anyways playing above it. I would just go for something that makes it sound big. Don't drown it in reverb. I mean, we can like turn it up all the way. You can then start hearing like the ring of the reverb. You can hear that it starts to overpower the original sound. We don't want that. The reverb is just like making it nicer, not like being the main thing. And here again, it really depends on the other elements in the song. If you have a very busy mix, every single element should have less reverb on there. If you're making banging, I don't know, big room EDM where it's just kick and a main synthesizer, yeah, the main synthesizer can have more reverb. If you want to, you can make it less to make it more in your face, but you have more wiggle room because there's just like one or two elements that even have reverb like at the same time. If you have a very complex production with like 50 to 100 tracks, then you have to make like all of those reverbs a little more subtle. Next up, or last, would be actually like the reverb types. You got plate reverb, spring reverbs. They're like convolution and impulse reverbs that were recorded originally. Basically just listen to them and like try to figure out yourself what they sound like and which one you prefer, because it's a stylistic choice. You can't say use this kind of reverb on vocals always. I know some people say that, but it's just not true. I mean, every type of reverb can work, and most of them are emulated old vintage methods of having reverbs. Like a plate reverb back in the days were like 2 plates and you feed it the sound into those plates and re-recorded it. A chamber reverb was like a reverb chamber in the studio. Some had like ceilings and walls that you could move to change the room size. Then you have the impulse reverbs where you just go somewhere and record the impulse response of a church or whatever. So they give you like different types and characteristics, but that's really up for you to decide. But listen for these things. Listen for them. Don't just slap any reverb on there. And my very last tip, be extremely, extremely, extremely careful if you use the reverbs that come with your synthesizer. These are usually, in my opinion, very shitty sounding reverbs. Even some of my favorite synthesizers, the reverbs on there are just shit. They're just there for show. So if you go through the presets, that you can imagine what it could sound like, so that the individual preset sounds fatter, but replace them. Just mute them and use one of your own reverbs where you can set up a lot more, because those like synthesizer reverbs built in usually have just very basic settings that won't give you the control that you need to have the right kind of reverb. So I hope this helps. Just like listen to it, think about every setting, know what these settings do, and yeah, the rest is experience and finding your own favorite and reusing it. That's basically how it works. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions about reverbs, let me know down below in the comments, and tomorrow we're back again here in the studio. Maybe we should do another one about delays, like making like a series out of this. Anyways, thanks a lot for watching. Sign out.
Things that I'll do to you.